Today we're going to talk about how to find the area of triangles. Now we're building off of the knowledge that we already have about finding area of rectangles and parallelograms. So refer to that and bear with me as I teach you the formula for finding area of a triangle and where exactly that comes from. We're going to begin with this rectangle. We could also call this a parallelogram, right? So we know that the formula for finding area of a rectangle is A equals base times height. Area equals the base times the height. So if the base is 10 and the height is 6, I know that if I'm going to find the area of this entire rectangle, that it is 10 times 6, which is 60 square units. But what if I cut the rectangle in half? What happens to the area if I cut the rectangle in half? Well, it makes sense that if I cut the rectangle in half, the area is also going to be cut in half. So how do I cut something in half? We've talked about it all year. I can divide it by 2. I can multiply it by 1/2. I can do lots of things. So 60 divided by 2 is going to be 30 units squared. But if I wanted to cut it in half, I can cut a rectangle in half a bunch of different ways. I could cut it here, I could cut it here, but because we're talking about area of triangles, I am going to cut it this way. So this is in half, right? If I took this apart and I flipped it around, it would match this side exactly. So what's true is the area of this triangle, and let's focus on this one right here. This triangle has an area that is half the area of the rectangle that it came from. Half the area of the parallelogram that it came from. So if that is true, then the way that we find the area of a triangle is very similar to the way we find the area of a rectangle, except we can just divide it in half, or divide it by 2. So here is your formula for area of a triangle. A equals 1/2 times the base times the height. So it's base times height, and then we are going to divide it in half. We're dividing it by 2. We're cutting it in half. The area of a triangle is half the product of its base B and its height H. Here are a few triangles that you may be asked to find the area of. It's very important that you are able to identify the base and the height of those triangles, so I'd like to talk you through that. Here this is very easy because the height is located inside the triangle. Remember that height is always perpendicular to the base. So here's a base, and then the height is going to be given somewhere inside here. The height is not one of the sides that are slanted. It must be straight down to the base. Here is a short-looking, long right triangle. Because it's a right triangle, the height is already perpendicular to the base. So you don't need to be looking for it inside the triangle, because it is, in fact, both sides are, in fact, base and height. Just be careful that you don't choose the hypotenuse. And then here, you've got an obtuse triangle. Now, it would be really hard to measure the height inside because the height of this triangle is really how tall it is, right? The distance from the base to the tallest part of the triangle. Well, because we have an obtuse triangle, the height has to be measured outside. Don't let this throw you off. The base is the distance from here to here. That's still the base of the triangle. The height just has to be shown on the outside in order for it to be measured perpendicular to the base. So we're going to just find the area of a few triangles, practicing using the area formula. And the area formula, I'm just going to write it at the top here, so I don't have to write it every time. You should write it every time, but for the purpose of the video, I'm going to go ahead and put A equals 1/2 times base times height. Now you don't have to put them in parentheses. You can. When it comes to putting the numbers into the formula, you're going to want to use parentheses or use a way to make sure you know you're using multiplication. You don't want to put the numbers right next to each other because they'll look like, in this case, 78 or 87, and that's not true at all, right? So if I'm finding the area of this triangle, I'm going to say, well, the area is 1/2 times the base, which in this case is 8, times the height, which is 7. Now the cool thing about this is I don't have to multiply 8 times 7 and then divide them by 2 if I don't want to. Because of the commutative property of multiplication, I can multiply 1/2 times 8 first, which is 4, and then 4 times 7 is 28. And that is very easy, right? So 28, it would be meters squared. I have to be careful to make sure I put an appropriate label on my answer. It's very important when we're talking about area. So 28 meters squared is the area of triangle A. How about B? I've got a right triangle, so it's nice to see that my area, or my base and my height are already kind of taken care of for me. So I can fill in A equals 1/2 the base, which is 7.5, times the height, which is 10. I'm going to take advantage of the commutative property again, and I'm going to switch the order of these two because I know half of 10 is 5. So 5 times 7.5, well, I can do this quickly. 5 over 1 times 15 halves is 30 halves, and, oh, 30. Wrong math. Got it. I was thinking it was 2. 5 times 15. Let me multiply that really quick. That's 25, 5, 6, 75. I knew that wasn't right. 75 halves, if we divide 75 by 2, we'll say that's 3, which is 6, and 15, that's 7, 14, 37.5. So A equals, I'm going to write it here, 37.5 centimeters squared is the answer to example B. And then C, here's one of those obtuse triangles I was telling you about. We've got a base and we have a height because the height is perpendicular to the base. I put these other measurements in here because I know that you will come across problems that will give you other measurements and you'll be tempted to choose them. Be disciplined, use your notes, and find out what the height actually is. Height is always perpendicular to the base. So if A is 1/2 BH, 1/2 times the product of the base and the height, then I'm going to say that the area is 1/2 times 4 times 6. Well, half of 4 is 2, times 6 is 12. So, oh, there we go, 12 inches squared. And that is the area of triangle C. So in some cases, you may be asked to find missing measurements within a triangle. Not too bad as long as you know the formula. See, you may know the base, and you may know the area, and then be asked to find the height. This is totally possible as long as you know the formula for area of a triangle. If I write the formula, which is area equals 1/2 times base times height, and I fill in what I know, solving for what I need is that much easier. So A is 18, and that equals 1/2 the base, which is 8, times the height. Well, half of 8 is 4, so 18 equals 4h. All I have to do to solve for h is divide by 4 on both sides. And when I do that, I'm going to get 4 goes into 18 4 times with 2 left over. So h is going to equal 4.5 centimeters. Okay. How about B? A equals 1/2 base times height. So I've got 1,045 for A equals 1/2. I don't know the base, but I do know the height is 95. Well, 1/2 of 95. What if I divided by 95 first? Am I allowed to do that? What happens? Can I? Let's see. Well, 95 divided by 95 is 1. So that does leave me with 1/2 B. That is okay. Does 95 evenly go into 1,045? Let's try. 1,045. Well, I know it's going to go into 104 once. That's 95. 10, 9, 9. Oh, this is going to work out nicely. 95 into 95 is once. So minus 95. Cool. So 11. So I've got 11 equals 1/2 B. Well, how do I undo 1/2 times B? I divide by 1/2. Dividing by 1/2 is very similar to multiplying by 2, right? Multiplying by 2 over 1. That cancels, leaving me with B. So times 2. B, the base of this triangle, is 22 inches. If you aren't sure and you don't believe me, what can you do? Check it. Put this in for B, put this in for H, 1/2 base times height, and you should get 1,045. See if I'm right. And then C, 1/2 base times height. I'm looking for A this time, so all I have to do is plug it in the formula. That's cool. So A equals 1/2 of 16 times 7/10. Fun. So 1/2 times 16 is 8. So 7/10 times 8, Well, that's going to be, I know that 8 times 7 is 56, but I know I have that one decimal place in there. It's like dividing by 10. So 56 divided by 10 is 5.6. So 5 and 6/10 feet squared. There it is. That's the answer. Don't believe me? Try it again. 8 times 0.7, yep, 56, 5.6. You got it. And that's it.